Gypsy was in a wheelchair. She had leukemia, and she was having seizures, and she had to be tube fed.
And then gradually that story fell apart.
Things are not always as they appear.
How do you kill your own mother?
This is a tragic event surrounded by mystery and public deception.
People thought of us as the sweetest mother-daughter, the best people in the world.
Happy belated Mother's Day, right?
Yes, thank your mom.
Dad, Mommy, Dad, and Dearest. Erin, another great documentary, another great true crime doc made by you. A few years ago, Erin made a documentary about the cannibal cop, which was pretty phenomenal. You had up-close personal access to him like nobody else did. And now you have up-close personal access to another kind of icky true crime story.
Thanks.
What drives this interest?
What drives this interest? I mean, I think it's, people think of sort of true crime potentially as being a little bit lowbrow, but I don't think it is. I think it's dealing with like liberty, with death, with murder, with things like that. I mean, how could you not sort of want to think about that? So I've always been interested in it, and if I can keep making movies about it, I will.
And how did you come across this story? And we'll get into what this story is in just a minute, but I'm going to tease you guys and lead us there.
Yeah, of course. So I was working with my co-producer, Allison Byrne, who I worked with on Thought Crimes for HBO, and there was this thought catalog piece, and it was this long, rambling, very just sort of very odd post about a young girl who was wheelchair bound that was involved in some way in the death of her mother. And so Allison started talking to me about it, and just like we were two schoolgirls, I was like, I have to know more. And so then I began the long, slow process of reaching out to the girl in question.
What did that process entail? Why was it long? Why was it slow?
Well,
where were they? Where were they already in their own process?
Sure. So Gypsy Blanchard was facing potentially the death penalty. She was involved in the murder of her mother, and so I reached out to her in a letter in prison, and basically she said, I can't talk right now, but I want to talk to you. And so it was this very slow, long process of trying to gain access to her. And so then when we were finally given access, then I had to go to the prison, asked to film there, and prisons do not like you filming there.
Yeah, they hate it.
Yeah, she came into the interview with handcuffs. I couldn't really touch her. This was, in terms of shaking her hand, we just touched elbows. But
what we did just now.
I couldn't, I couldn't even sort of make her feel safe or comfortable. She was in handcuffs, but she was there because she was involved in a murder.
You still extract a pretty incredible interview out of her. I think that that has to do with your skills as an interviewer, but I'm also assuming it's because she wanted so badly to tell her story.
Right. So we interviewed her for 2.5, I think almost 3 hours. And before I had spoken to her, she always seemed like a little girl. She wasn't always present. I asked her if she'd ever seen a documentary. She said that she hadn't. I later found evidence that she had watched the movie Blackfish, a really incredible documentary. And so it always felt like she was participating in impression management with me. So when we did the interview, I was just like, okay, is it going to be the infant, the baby sort of version of her, or is it going to be this adult woman who I know to be 25 years old and knows what she did was wrong? And what she did, she came to the interview in a very self-referential, articulate. She was really brutally honest about herself and about the crime.
Yeah, at the same time, you present, before I think her interview really starts, or maybe it's halfway through the film, someone says you can't really trust much of what she's saying. So where did you fall, and how did you feel about that while you were interviewing her?
Yeah, I mean, I worked with our team a lot. So it's Andrew Rossi, producer and incredible filmmaker, Andrew Kaufman, and I mentioned Allison, and it's called being an unreliable narrator. And when you're making films about crime, you can't always trust the subject because they have a reason to lie to you. So what do? You look towards the evidence. You look at the medical records. You look at the police reports. You talk to both sides of the story. What I find really impressive was it not just that the defense team spoke with us, but also the prosecution spoke with us. Typically you're going to get a one-sided story, and I think it's pretty clear that I don't think an abuse victim belongs in prison for that long, but I think that it was important that the prosecution feel like they also had something to say.
Now let's talk about her as an abuse victim. We saw a little bit of it in the trailer, but not so much. Talk about Gypsy Blanchard's past, what led up to the murder of her mother, without really giving away, it's actually hard to have this conversation because you don't want to give away the whole story for when people tune in tonight on HBO at 10 p.m.
Right. It is really difficult to explain. It basically, the movie starts with a murder. It's the crime scene. So that is not the most interesting part. It's about why did the murder take place? And without giving away too much, I can talk about basically the woman on my left, the woman in blue that's smiling, sort of grinning, really. She kept her daughter sick for years and years and years of her life to gain disability benefits from the government, to go to Disney World, to meet the cast of Harry Potter. She was living her sort of best life through having her daughter pretend to be disabled. There was just extreme amounts, like shaving Gypsy's head so that it would seem like she was getting chemotherapy, making her take epilepsy meds so her teeth would fall out. This was the most shocking, crazy crime abuse story I'd ever witnessed. And so when we look at the end result, we look at the murder, we wonder, is it justified? And that's one of 80 things I could bring up right now in terms of what happened in this case. It's just, what happens when you're held hostage, not only in your own house, but in your body.
Now, what do you think about Gypsy serving time? Obviously, you said if you commit a murder, you should, serve some time, but an abuse victim serving time is a different thing. What about the type of time that she is serving? Is she in a prison? Is she in an institution? Is she somewhere where she can be reformed and get help? Because obviously if there's someone who could be reformed in some capacity, it's an abuse victim who lashed out.
Right. I don't want to throw shade at the Missouri State prison system, but I will. That is not a place to get help. Yeah. She has been psychologically traumatized, and now she is seeing a counselor at the prison. She's at Chillicothe Prison in Missouri. That is not enough.
It's not necessarily that prison system's fault, right? I mean, that prison system isn't built to do this. It's the system itself that isn't sort of putting things in place to help people who need.
But that's where they put her. That's where they put her in a prison, so they are taking responsibility for her well-being. She was not placed in a mental health facility. Sometimes that happens. She could have gone to a health facility. No, she's in a prison. I think that the majority of the work internally and externally will have to happen when she's outside, when she gets on the outside.
Because you're talking about a young girl who her abuse was so much of that abuse was manipulation, and she has learned how to manipulate.
Some of that abuse was physical. Yeah. It wasn't manipulation. I mean, she had surgeries done on her. I think that when I first started working on this, I was like, okay, so out in public, when you're at the movies, you're forced to be in a wheelchair. That is not the case. She had her salivary glands removed because she was drooling in doctor's visits. She was drooling because her mother kept giving her medication. I mean, these were invasive sort of things. She had a feeding tube. Part of me always wondered, why didn't she run away? She tried once to run away. But what I always come back to, and what a lot of loud people have emailed me very clearly saying, you do not know what it feels like to be psychologically and physically abused in this way. You say, oh, she could run away. She couldn't. She couldn't.
Right. Why don't they run away is the same sort of victim blaming that women who, or people in domestic violent relationships get all the time.
Yeah, it's a hostage movie.
Yeah. This is a hostage movie. When did you come to terms with that? Did you figure that out at some point, or did you just say that right now?
I for a long time as a woman have been very scared of the thought that you could be walking down the street as a young girl and you could just get snatched. And as young people, we're talked about as stranger danger and things like that. And so when this happens, in your own home, with your parent, I mean, that's when it sort of occurred to me that it was a hostage. She could not get up and walk away. She could not do anything. And I watched Heavenly Creatures and the film Room, which is, spectacular movies. And it just sort of during the edit, this is what it sort of came to us.
She is once again in a situation though where she cannot get up and walk away. she's behind bars. And in no way is that going to help her or reform her. Or do you have hope for her future?
I ask her in the film, is 10 years in prison better than 10 years living the way that you had to live? And she said, in prison. That is a remarkable statement. And so, like, when I talk to her on the phone and she has this very sing-songy voice, she says, I'm doing fine, da-da-da. And so I don't think she's going to be that honest with me. The prison calls are recorded. Right. I think that there's a reason to lie about your treatment in prison. I'm not saying that she's being mistreated in prison, but, like, I don't have clarity on that. But yeah, I think she is better off and has more access to freedom, even walking in the prison, than she did in her own house.
What were you most struck by when it came to interviewing the prosecutors or interviewing officers who had arrested her and investigated this?
I really was looking forward to the sheriff interview. In press conferences, he seemed to have this sort of this flair for the dramatic. He was able to know, like, things are not always as they appear. And I was like, you just made a soundbite for this documentary. Like, it's almost as if he knew. But when we sat down with him, he would not answer 80% of our questions. So that felt pretty
Why?
sort of... I think the trial was gonna happen soon, and he just... was like, he just wanted to be really careful about what he said. I think the prosecutor, Dan Patterson, comes across really well. He ultimately gave Gypsy a decent deal. But yeah, I was always sort of more interested in Gypsy.
And when you got in touch with Gypsy, you said it took a really long time to get her to agree to do the interview. What sort of things did you do to try to get her to agree?
There's no trying to get anyone to do anything. I think it's just speaking with the family members, and I filmed with her dad and her stepmom, and so, like, they were comfortable with me. And then I filmed with Mike Stanfield, and he was comfortable with me. And I was not sort of confrontational when it came to our interviews. And what I tried to communicate is, like, this is a human story. I'm not coming at this from, like, look at this shocking murder. I'm looking at, like, what happened to these people? And I hope that every film that I sort of work on, it shows the human side. Like with Gil Valley and the Cannibal Cop documentary, Thought Crimes, people were so scared of him. He basically went to prison because people were scared of him, and we wanted to show that he had a human side. So I think anytime I'm interested in making something, I want to show the human element.
And I think the human element really comes across with how much time you spend with Gypsy's father in the film. What was it like getting him to participate in the film? And what were your thoughts on his... I guess you don't want to cast judgment of any kind, whether it be positive or negative, but sort of on his role in Gypsy's life. He seemed to me personally to sort of wipe his hands clean of it at a certain point.
Right, that's a great question. I spent a lot of time with Rod. Rod, works on an oil rig. He has his kids. He loves his wife. He's a very sort of put together, buttoned down sort of guy. He does not like cameras. He does not like, lights up in his house. He does not like talking about sort of his ex-wife. But slowly but surely, I think the turning point for us was when we got on a boat on the bayou and started filming him, and he just kind of was able to have sort of fun with us, and the cameras sort of went away for him. But he does take ownership that he could have investigated what was going on with his kid. From what he knew, she was really well cared for, and he had a job, he had kids, they were in a different state. I think he carries guilt with him, but Gypsy, and for her part, says she does not blame him. Dee Dee, her mother, was a master manipulator, and there's really nothing that he could have done because they were so far away.
And wasn't Dee Dee's mother also a manipulator? Isn't that, you explore that? There's like a family history of manipulation.
Right. There are some allegations in the film surrounding the death of her mother, but I won't say more than that.
Keep it mysterious.
Yes, very mysterious.
Let's get some questions from the audience right here.
Hey, this movie actually seems pretty fascinating. I never even heard of a case like this. I was just wondering, like, were there like similar cases that you found related to this, or like was there anything specific that drew you into it?
Yeah, of course. There was a case involving a woman named Lacey Spears, who was charged in the death of poisoning her son through salt. And I was pretty obsessed with that case. So basically, a large part of the film is about Munchausen by proxy, which is a psychological disorder where a mother or caretaker feigns illness in their child. And so like that as a psychological principle seemed fascinating to me. This for this story, it just had so much, it had so many more turns. And in the other case, the child died. I mean, it's really, really difficult for people to watch films about where a child has passed away because of an action. But we are lucky, and I sit here today and I can have sort of like goofs with Ricky about it, like, because she's alive. It's gonna be okay.
Did we have goofs? I didn't.
Sort of. Some laughs, like 2 laughs.
With the case that you're talking about where the mother was poisoning her son, what is her name again?
Lacey Spears.
That is the case where she was slowly poisoning him over the course of a number of years, right? It was a pretty big case, like a year or two ago, or was it more recent than that?
Right, and she, I think that, while she had brought him to the hospital, she actually went into the bathroom and was seen, a camera is not in the bathroom, and that's where the prosecutor said there was this fatal dose of salt in his feeding tube. It's despicable, it's evil, it's mindless. Like, you can't really understand it.
Is it just despicable and evil, or have they found sort of like where that comes from psychologically in a parent? Is it just evil manipulation, or is there some sort of attachment disorder?
Well, I think with Lacey Spears, and of course I'm not a doctor in any way, I'm not an expert, but
We're just speculating.
just having...
just a little irresponsible speculation on.
Oh, geez. I think that it basically, mothers get into this mindset of, my child is sick, and then when a doctor can't find it, the mother will make the child sick to be proven right. Thank goodness it's completely rare that for this to happen. But it still exists. And in the age of social media, where you can get attention for having a sick child, there is this crazy new wave of Munchausen, basically posting about your sick child and potentially making them sick to make the post true.
Next question.
Hi. So I'm curious, I think we're living in a time where true crime documentaries are becoming really, really popular, and like everyone's talking about them, like Making a Murder and the Amanda Knox story. So why do you think, these kind of things become such a phenomenon?
I love the Amanda Knox film. Shout out to Brian McGinn. He is an incredible director. And then his co-director, Rod. That movie was just like, I remember I was so excited for that. And like, I love documentaries. But for me to be really excited about something, there has just to be this like fascination.
They did a great job with that doc too. Yeah. They did a great job exploring the element of the media and social media at that time.
Totally. Yeah. So I think that true crime has always been around. And, like you look at HBO's Paradise Lost trilogy by Bruce Fenosky and Joe Berlinger, that was giant. But I think that we're living in this age where basically there is an HBO, there's a Netflix, there is just access to millions of people in a way that can basically vocalize how interested in the subject matter they are. I think that it's just by virtue of interest, like your interest and my interest, and hopefully your interest, and some other people potentially who have an interest tonight.
Well, there's also the idea that you said at the beginning of this interview, you said it's not just lurid, that true crime also involves murder, it involves honor, it involves family. There's all of these sort of classic themes that are in it. And true crime has always been very popular. It's never not been popular. What we're seeing is people who are taking the sort of form of true crime and adding an element of sophistication to the storytelling, I would say.
I mean, I think that, when we look at a trial, when we look at what is happening during a trial, there is nothing more at stake than a person's liberty. So, like, I completely agree with that. Like, when you're waiting to hear if a guilty or not guilty verdict is read, I mean, it's almost like you're waiting with bated breath. So I think that there's a way to do true crime incorrectly. I think it's a blame the victim, super flashy, really, really quickly put together. And I think there's a way to do it correctly. And I hope that this is that.
This is that. I think I have time for one more question right here.
Thank you for being here. So I'm really excited to see the doc. I'm wondering, since you're so into true crime docs and stuff like that, are there any other stories or subject matters that you'd like to explore in the future?
That is a great question. Everyone here should watch The Staircase. Have any of you watched The Staircase?
What is The Staircase?
Oh my gosh. It is the most amazing series. I think it's on Sundance Doc Club. It is about it's about a writer who may or may not have killed his wife. And it's a little bit on the older side, but I've watched it 2 or 3 times, the entire series. It's from the defense perspective, then it's from the prosecution perspective. It is one of the most mind-blowing television experiences I've ever had. Yeah.
So are you working on other projects, other true crime projects?
I am.
You can't talk about them, though.
I'm covering a murder trial upcoming for a film for HBO, and working on a book and working on a couple other TV things, and just trying to keep hustling because it's the New York way.
Erin, congratulations on the film. It's you did an incredible job. It is thrilling, scary, and disturbing. As disturbing as it should be. Erin Lee Carr, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.